Importing assets with Python is one of the most common uses of automation in Unreal Engine. You can import a whole folder of assets using a single script. It executes in just a blink of an eye, and voila, we have not only meshes, but also the materials imported. Required code is quite simple. But first, let me give you a short introduction. We will discover all FBX files in a given folder. For each one of those files, we will create an import task. It is just all the data required to execute a task by some person. That means, in our case, that task knows what file we are importing, where it goes, so it knows the destination path and name of the asset, but it also knows what kind of asset we are importing. It may know what are the settings of the import. Like, you could have automated everything import, but if you have specific settings you demand from your meshes, maybe you want them to import textures or not, you want to import materials or not. Such things can be declared in import options, and those can be stored in the task. And that's it. Once we create a list of all those tasks, we go one by one and execute them. Luckily, we don't have to do it ourselves. Everything is already prepared in Unreal. It has its own class for tasks, and there is also a function that can execute them. So, without further ado, let's begin. I will start with locating my files. I have some source path that leads to my test folder with 3 FBX meshes. But be prepared. What if I had some PowerPoint presentation there? Or a texture, literally anything. I will go with PowerPoint. You don't want it to be imported, right? And you don't want it to create any errors. So when searching for source files, we have to filter by extension. And the easiest way to do it is by using a pathlib module. And honestly, if you don't know what pathlib is, that's when you should pause this video and Google, because pathlib is a module for handling paths in Python. It uses objects, it's super simple, and I am almost sure that we already used it in the tutorial, but who knows, maybe you skipped some part of the course and you don't remember. So, no problem, you can just copy a line of code I'm using here, but remember to import this path object from pathlib. If you dive deeper into what the function does, it looks for files that are located in a given location, which is this folder, but it doesn't look into folders beneath. So if we had another folder here, and we had more meshes inside, this folder wouldn't be scanned. If you really want to iterate over all those folders, then you have to change glob function to rglob, which is like recursive glob. And what is taken as a parameter? You just use a regular expression that operates over the file name. Regular expressions may be tedious and difficult to use, but when it comes to extensions, it's super simple. It's just asterisk, dot, and I don't know, PNG, or blend file, or OBJ. And in our case, it is just an FBX. So that's great. The last thing when it comes to all those paths is destination path. In my case, I would like it to go to enviro folder, and that path is actually a game/enviro. We can now iterate over all assets to import and create tasks. That will be the loop. We will create tasks here and we will assign them to some list. We can start with using a list object. We could go with typing, and let's say that this is going to be unreal.asset import task, and it starts as an empty list. And later, who knows, maybe we will change it to Unreal Array, but it doesn't make much difference. Let's create this task as unreal.asset import task. Remember about parentheses here to initialize the object. We will do some stuff with this object, and at the end we will append it to our list. So what about the task object properties? When we go into the documentation with middle mouse click, we will see that there is plenty of parameters, and they are exposed as editor properties, but they also have some getters and setters, so you don't have to call those functions like getEditor property or setEditor property to access it. The first parameter I will set is automated. Basically, when you import mesh like FBX, Unreal shows a dialog and asks you, what import options would you like to pick? And there may be even more dialogues. In case of FBX meshes, sometimes there is something wrong with order of vertexes, and Unreal may ask you if you want to resolve it. It's great when you are manually working with things and that happens, but when you leave your computer to import 1,000 of meshes, you don't want it to pause at some moment because the mesh number 27 didn't have some setting picked, and now Unreal is just waiting until you click through the dialog. Even if you want to catch such cases, just print that to the log or to some file on your desktop. So once all the processing is done, you can just go through files that are incorrect. That may really save you if you are doing something on a remote machine, or if you are just leaving your machine to import files. It's 4 p.m., you're going home and you expect everything to be working at 8 a.m. next day in the studio. So we will set task automated as true. We also have to pick task destination name, destination path, and file name. The destination name and path simply tell you where the file is going. So when we have our task destination path, that is just the destination path, which is the folder game enviro. Task destination name is name of the asset, and we can take it from our input file path. That is path to our source asset, and that is listed by pathlib module, so it is a path object which has a stem function that will return you just the name. When you are processing those things, make sure that you never pass actual path object into any of Unreal properties, just because they are not supported. In many cases, all you have to do is to cast it to the string. However, I do know that this stem is returned actually as a string, so I'm not doing it. But if I was, for instance, passing this input file path as a file name, which I'm going to do, then yes, I have to cast it. So the next parameter is aforementioned task file name. This is the input file, and I know it may be confusing. File name sounds like the asset file name that we're creating, but this is actually path to the input file. So cast to the string, and here goes input file path. Nice. And then we can decide if we want to replace an existing asset if we already had it in engine. What does it mean? Let's go to Unreal, and can you see those assets here? They are already imported. So what would happen if I rerun my script? If replace existing is enabled, I'm just going to re-import them. But if it was disabled, those files would be just skipped, and that's it. You may also notice that some of them have asterisks here and some not. The meshes don't have them. That's because I had save set to true in my script. That may be very useful because if you are importing assets and saving them, that means that even if application crashes, you are not losing any data. So I will set replace existing to true and save to true. And these are the settings that I would almost always set for any asset I am importing. So if you are importing textures, animations, you have to set those. These are common. But there are also settings that are specific for specific asset type, like meshes. And those can be stored in a property called options. When we go here to the docs, it just tells you import options specific to the type of asset. But when you start searching for them, for that import option or some keyword, then you will discover that there are lots of them here. And for instance, if you are importing just an FBX, there is a so-called FBX import UI. Here we have it, and sadly, it's based only on object. So we cannot do a right mouse button and search for other classes that inherit from it. That would probably make searching for those import options simpler, but documentation is your friend, and I think it will be sufficient. Let's assign task options, and we'll have some options object here, and options don't exist yet. Let's create them, but we don't have to create them in the loop. Recreating them 1,000 times for 1,000 assets wouldn't be efficient. We want to have same options everywhere, so we will declare them somewhere here. And options equals unreal.fbx import UI, and here we can set the settings we need. There are things like import mesh, which may sound obvious, but FBX file can be also used for storing animations. So yeah, we have to enable import mesh. We will also pick import materials and maybe set import textures to false because I want to keep it lightweight. But textures may be important to you, so you would set them as true. So those first three parameters can go here without any other explanation, but there is one pretty interesting option here. It is called automated import should detect type. That literally means that this importer would try to figure out what exactly you are importing. We will set it to true for our convenience, but if you scroll down, you will notice that there are things like mesh type to import, and you just pass FBX import type. So, options, automated import mesh should detect type true, and I already know that my example assets are all static meshes. And those things like static mesh or skinned mesh also have their own options. And we can declare them here. Let's assign them. Static mesh import data equals, and I will create a variable of the same name. And let's declare it maybe here in the line 10. That is FBX static mesh import data, but you can already see that there are more, like FBX mesh import data, FBX skeletal mesh import data, FBX scene import option static mesh, blah blah blah. It's really hard to describe all of them, but they are pretty well described in the documentation and in the code. So when you pick something that looks like it fits your needs, then dive into it. We will go with static mesh import data, and honestly, we will set only two settings. First of them is combine meshes. And I think I didn't really mention what it does, and it may be unclear for some of you. I will quickly open Blender so you can picture what I mean. Some meshes are quite self-contained. Like this Suzanne model appears as a single mesh in my scene collection. But when I go into edit mode, I am actually able to select only the eye or maybe whole head, and we can separate them. But some assets are created of many mesh objects, and we can just start adding more of them. Now, our scene collection tell us that there are 3 meshes. We can export them as a single FBX, but Unreal is still able to import all of them separately. The thing is that very often we create some asset that is consisting of more smaller objects, but it's still a single asset. You don't want to create a gun that has too many separate objects. I know it may be animated and so on, but very often you just need a single asset in Unreal. So that's why we set combined meshes to true. It's for importing them as one mesh. But of course, you can set it to false. And if you never worked with that setting, I actually advise you to experiment. But let me set it to true. There is also another setting that has a weird name, and it's called remove degenerates. And the documentation will tell you that it removes degenerative triangles. What it does, it basically doesn't import polygons or vertexes that are causing trouble to Unreal. You can probably ignore that setting, but you cannot ignore warnings from Unreal. Sometimes you will get an information that it wasn't able to triangulate some face, and for that reason a whole object wasn't imported. So in that case, if my scene had any object that had a small issue with the geometry, and honestly creating it is quite simple. Like right now we probably have a non-manifold wireframe already because I just created a mesh that isn't physically possible, and we can even run searching for non-manifolds. And if I try to import that whole FBX to Unreal right now, this sphere will not import, only those two. And you will get that warning. That warning is most likely because somewhere on this mesh there is a non-manifold geometry. And I don't know how it works in Maya or 3ds Max, but in Blender, all you have to do is to search for select by trait non-manifold, and it will literally select all those vertices. So that's how you can track this issue. And yeah, that is probably a degenerate triangle, but I didn't dive into algorithm that Epic implemented. Anyway, our code is almost ready. We have all the settings needed for the tasks. We have a task list, but we don't execute them yet. You cannot just run task dot, I don't know, execute or run. You have to pass this task to something that executes it. At least that's how it's implemented in Unreal. And that is pretty simple. It is executed by asset tools. We shouldn't create asset tools object directly, but we can get it using a function. So let's call Unreal asset tools helpers, and then we call get asset tools, and that's it. Then we can just run import asset tasks, pass our list as a parameter, and that's it. But let's not stop here. Let's dive deeper, because I just want to remind you that there are more functions like that. You can import task with dialog, and then you will be able to pick the destination path for your assets, which is great. There are some things like open editor for assets, which is very useful because later you can open those assets in editor. That's great. And you can also find references to objects, export meshes, export assets. I really recommend you to look into that class. It's very, very useful. Oh yeah, and once all of that is done, we can print a list of objects we imported, and we can copy this code right now, but you already have seen how it works, and just paste it. And we re-imported the assets we already have, and they were re-imported because every place existing was set to true. That's here. Earlier in the tutorial, I mentioned that we can do something with the tasks list. Right now, it is highlighted here because PyCharm knows that this is not the type we were expecting. In PyCharm, there is like kind of a command that can disable checking the type for a specific line. It's probably different for other editors, but it's not perfect because right now I can pass a string called potato here, and there is no type checking that tells me that there is an error. So we can either live with having that thing here highlighted, or we can just switch to using Unreal type. And in many cases, using Unreal list will not be useful, but let's mention it so you at least know how to use it in future. And I guess it's not the first time I will be explaining it, and not the last time. So instead of using list, we can use Unreal array, and we have to initialize it with those brackets here, but we also should pass a type that it will contain here. So it could be integer, it could be string, but in our case, this is Unreal Asset Import task, so we have to put it here. This array behaves kinda like arrays in Python, like those lists. It has append, it has extend, it has insert, so the code we already have will work. This will work like this append, but it's not identical to lists in Python. So on one hand, everything works and we no longer have this highlight here because it's correct type. On the other hand, it still may be annoying. So this is one of the solutions here, but another one is just converting the Python list to the Unreal one. So how do we do it? Let's bring the old code back, and we can even put that Unreal stuff file on the right side here, so we have a cheat sheet. This class has something called cast. So we can call Unreal array, and now we are not using parentheses, we are just calling a class function, and now we have cast. And first we want to tell it what is the data we are going to store, so this is Unreal Asset Import task, and then we pass the object that we are casting, so this is tasks. And we can actually use this line instead of the one here, and we will have that highlight fixed. I think it is pretty inconvenient for you to write it this way, but maybe in some point of future you will just have to do something with Unreal arrays. Maybe there will be some function that expects an array, and yeah, that's what you're gonna do. So let's copy this code to make sure it works, you know, for the last time. Let's paste it here. There were no errors. Files are still here. We got that information that we imported something. So I am happy with the result. I know that some of you may not be importing FBXs, you may be importing textures, and this tutorial may be partially helpful, but may not be an exact solution. But I'm sorry, there are so many types of assets, I just can't cover all of them, but I think this video is the base knowledge you need, and it will really get you going. Thanks a lot, and hopefully see you in the next video.